Hello, welcome to Into the Fire, a Burning Coal Theater Company podcast series.
Hi, this is Jerome Davis. I'm the Artistic Director of Burning Coal Theater Company, and I'd like to welcome everyone to Into the Fire, the Burning Coal Theater Company podcast series on all things theatrical. We have a very special guest today, Chelsea Woolley, who is a playwright from Canada, whose play, Paint Me This House of Love, will be opening at Burning Coal on the 30th of January and running through the 16th of February. Chelsea, welcome and thank you for coming.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
Chelsea, among the few things that I know about you, I know that you're Canadian. I know that you are a graduate of the tell me the name of it again.
The
National Theatre School Academy, which is in Montreal,
yeah.
And that was back in 2017.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
And that was for playwriting.
Yeah.
Now, that was post-college or in lieu of college?
Yeah, post-college. So I did 5 years in Lethbridge, Alberta. I got a history degree and a teaching degree.
Uh-huh.
And then had this choice to make where I had an offer to teach theater and social studies in a high school in Calgary. But then I also had this little inkling of this thing that had been always a part of my life that I really wanted to see if I could do for real and professionally, and so I applied to the National Theatre School, thinking there's no way I'm getting into this program. It's 2 people a year, and then I got in, so moved across the country and ended up doing 3 years in Montreal.
Impressive. And was that based on a work that you submitted to them, or how did that happen?
So you had to apply with 2 plays. One of the plays I had just done with a student theater company in Lethbridge. It was a historical play about the Second World War, and so I applied with that as my main play, and then threw in another that was like a first draft of a play that I had just been starting work on, and then there was an shortlist interview in Montreal where you got to talk about your play and your ideas and who you were as an artist, and then I got in.
It's fantastic.
Yeah.
And what was that program like? Was it exclusively writing, or were there other aspects to the program?
The program was a conservatory program, so your schedule was completely dictated by the teachers there. It was a lot of playwriting. Every year you had your major projects that they would pair you up with professional playwrights or directors to help sort of mentor you through the year. There were playwriting classes, and then there were also peppered throughout some classes that they would put us into, like the acting. There were 12 actors a year,
Uh-huh.
and so I did all of the movement classes for 3 years with them. I did stage combat with them. I did a class called Jeu, which was like clown and bouffant with them. So it was a good mix, but it was really a very concentrated playwriting program.
Canada is focusing a lot on new works.
Yeah.
It seems to me. Has that been the case throughout your experience living there, or is it a more recent phenomenon?
It's been the experience since I've been professionally playwriting, but it is actually pretty recent in the history of Canada. I'd say probably in the 70s is when the shift started happening. There were some real key theatre companies in Toronto especially that were founded on this idea of new Canadian work, Canadian playwrights. Before that it was a lot of British plays and like mid-century American plays that were coming up.
Sure.
So it's interesting that it feels like there's been sort of maybe 1.5 generations of playwrights coming before me that are really being embraced in the country.
Like a George Walker.
George Walker, yeah. So it's great because those people are still alive, and so they're still working in my community. I've met some of them. But I've felt nothing but the support of most theatre companies that because they do have such a focus on new Canadian work.
So history and education was the original thrust. Yeah. History, it seems to me, and theater are very much interrelated. In some ways, they feel like twin disciplines. You know, most theater is about what happened, right? Sometimes it's fictional what happened, but often it's not. It's based on history or based on people within history. I'm thinking of Hamilton, for instance, which is a very obvious example of that. But many times otherwise, Did you see a connection between those things as a young person, or did they feel like two entirely different disciplines?
That's a great question. I mean, I don't think it was a mistake that the play, this World War II play that I wrote that got me into the school, was written while I was studying history. I think the connection that I find between the two disciplines is when I'm starting a play, my first impulse is read everything, research everything, go to the library for days and just stack up the books and sort of follow my instincts. So that means reading a lot of plays, but also, depending on the play itself, reading parallel research or history, even if it's not a history play. So yeah, I do think they're connected. The other way that I think they're connected is as a professional playwright, I don't know if it's the same here in the United States, but in Canada, half of your job, it feels like, is writing grants and being able to articulate what your play is about, how the audience is going to be connected to that work, how it connects to your community. And it really does feel like writing history papers, like having your thesis.
Right. Is that a good thing, do you think?
Writing grants all the time?
Well, or having to we have this question all the time that we have to answer on grants that is some variation on what good will this do the community or the population. And I always want to say it's art, there's no second sentence, it's
Yes.
art. Do you feel like that, or do you feel like there's value in that kind of micro-focusing on the value of art?
I think it's yet to be determined. I feel like it's a part of the culture right now. I think in the worst case scenario, it becomes the checkbox of like I know one of the granting agencies in Ontario where I live is really focused on playwrights that don't live in Toronto, which is
just
admirable.
Because so many do.
Yes, but then it's confusing because I'm not from Toronto, but I moved there so that I could work seriously in playwriting, and so because of that, I'm less likely to get a grant.
The door slams.
Yeah, so I think we have to be careful about having it too much in a rubric where it doesn't matter what you're writing if you don't check the boxes. But I understand the idea of wanting to make sure that you're creating theater that speaks to your community and the people in your community, because without them, theater won't happen.
Right.
So I think it's a fine balance, and certain theaters I think are doing better than others at finding that balance.
There was a famous, I think it's more or less a factual story about an early grant written by Twyla Tharp, the choreographer, who famously wrote on the grant, "No time, send money," and got the grant, and I thought, well, let's go back to those days. That would be nice. So you said, history and education, and now the education component of that was because it felt like the best way to use your interest in history to serve people and to make a living off of it, or?
I think so. Both my mom and my older sister are teachers, so it's sort of the family business, so it felt very obvious. It actually wasn't. I did my first year of university in linguistics, which was so left field, but it was really a panic move because I wanted to apply to the National Theatre School for acting at that time. And then didn't end up doing it, sort of chickened out, and so was left with a couple months left before I needed to apply for university, and so then just went with linguistics because it sounded neat.
Yeah.
Did a year of
Chomsky
that.
studied.
Yeah, exactly.
Teaches linguistics. Yeah.
Yes, was not a great move, was not a right fit, but I'd taken history classes during the year as just electives and loved it. So I knew that was the route, but then I think, just as you said, what do you do with a history degree? And so I tacked on this education component because it was something so known to me and my family.
And where were you at that time? You had grown up outside of Toronto.
I grew up in Alberta, Calgary,
Right.
over by the Rockies,
Right.
and then moved down. So I went to university in Lethbridge, which is about 2 hours south, right on the border of the United States, basically.
North of one of the Dakotas, maybe, or?
I I should know. Maybe Minnesota.
Okay, a little bit more central. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Good. That's very good. And was there a theater world there? Was there a theater community in Lethbridge?
Lethbridge.
Lethbridge.
Surprisingly, yes. There is a very small but mighty theater community. It's a university town. So the University of Lethbridge had, like, at the time, the biggest theater in southern Alberta, right in the university. Okay. So I was in some of the university plays in this massive, like, I don't know how many seats, but 800 seat theater. Yeah. And then beyond that, they did have some theater professionally around town, but it really was made up of who was in the town at the time, I think, teaching at the university. So we had a teacher who I think came from Ontario, who came in and started his own theater company that was really diverse and I think very challenging for some of the more conservative sort of rural people that lived in Lethbridge. Mm-hmm. But it did very well because people had an appetite for seeing theater and being a part of a theater community.
Yeah. And was that the first? You mentioned that little thing that was still in your mind even after you finished college. Was that the beginning of that? Was it that small community, or was it things you had traveled to see in other places, or television or film? Sometimes we confuse those things with theater.
It was actually much before that. In grade 4, I was very lucky. My family took me to see theater in Calgary, where I grew up. But in grade 4, I had a teacher who, during free writing time, would let me write a play and then choose classmates, and then we'd go out in the hall and rehearse it, and I would direct it. Yeah. So I think I started playwriting as a way to, like, boss around my classmates. Yeah. And then did that for a couple of years until nobody wanted to be bossed around anymore. And so by about grade 6, I stopped.
They all wanted to be directors.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I stopped, and then really got back into it in high school when it was a component of the drama classes that I was in. But it really was, like, every summer I would write a little 20-minute play just for fun, until I went to Lethbridge, and it was the theater in the university that had a real surprising emphasis on playwriting, considering there weren't a lot of classes for playwriting, but there were teachers who were professional local playwrights, and there was a competition that an alumni had set up. It was like a scholarship competition for playwriting. So there were a lot of people who were writing plays every year, doing them in the student company, and so that really reignited this spark of, if I write it, it can get done, it can get produced on a student level.
In some ways, it's what's left. In the theater world, each day we die. Our performance dies, our production dies. But the script remains, right? So in some way, it is the way toward something more of the kind of immortality, if one may use such a word, that the visual arts or a composer might attain if one is really, really good, a filmmaker. We assume those films that are really good are going to be around for a long time. But the performance that the actor just gave on stage last night is gone now, and so in some ways there's something more tangible about writing. Does that matter to you, or did that ever occur to you as a young person?
I think it's I leaned towards playwriting over acting because as an actor you're indebted. You have to wait until you're cast, or there's a rehearsal, or there's a production, and I was so hungry to be a part of theater that waiting for the one university production that I could actually get into every year, it just wasn't enough. I wanted to be able to get home from classes and just go into the world and like feel all the actor emotions from my couch. It felt like a more accessible version of all of the things that I already loved about theater. And still to this day, that's what I love about it, is that I can go outside right now, pull out my notebook, and be doing theater.
Yeah, or even dreaming it, thinking about it. Yeah. Aaron Sorkin, the writer and playwright, once broke his nose delivering lines of his own dialogue into the bathroom mirror, which I think is one of the funnier stories.
Yes, that is my writing style as well. I remember I was in a lobby of the school that I went to, writing a play, and I have to whisper the lines out loud to myself, or it won't work. Yeah. And I remember a teacher coming up behind me and saying, "I thought that was you muttering to yourself in the corner."
Good. Now let's talk a little bit about one of your mutterings that has found its way to Raleigh, North Carolina, which is "Paint Me This House of Love."
Yeah.
When did you originally write that?
2019, I was awarded a residency award at a theater in Toronto called the Tarragon Theater.
Yeah.
And so I had basically a year to write a new play for them with their support. And Paint Me This House of Love came out of that.
I'm interviewing Mike next week
Okay.
for this same podcast series. Yeah, he's excited about this happening.
Yeah,
I think.
cool.
So 2019, but then it makes its way to the Tarragon stage in 2023, I believe. Is that correct?
Yes.
April, I believe.
Yeah.
And we saw it. We at Burning Cold saw it because we did one of our tours up there. We brought a group of, I think that year was maybe 42 or 43 people. Mm-hmm. Felt like we were about half the audience.
I bet. Yeah.
But it was an extraordinary experience from my standpoint because I felt like I was hearing a new voice, and it didn't. There's certain things that are going to be repeated in any time the English language is applied to something, but in this case it didn't feel derivative to me. It felt like a new voice with something new to say. Do you think when you set out to write a play, and perhaps not all plays work the same way with you, but do you feel like you're setting out to make a point, to tell a story, to bring a character to life, or some of the above? What is the goal when you sit down and start to write?
So the idea of whatever I want the story to be about, of course, comes first in some form. But for me, it doesn't become a play that I am interested in writing until I've decided what the structure, what the container of the play is going to look like on stage. I'm a real firm believer in a play should exist as something different from a TV script or a movie script or a musical. You have this gift of like a live audience. You're in a space. You're also in a space where everybody who's watching has signed the invisible contract to suspend their disbelief. So you can do anything you want. Whereas in TV, I think you're a little bit more stuck in realism. And so I always try to think, what is the theatrical container that this play could use? And if I don't have that, I get bored very easily. So with this play, I knew it was a play about this father and this daughter trying to communicate and get to know each other and make a relationship after so many years apart. So communication was the key, and so I wrote all of their dialogue with one exception in these sentence fragments, because it's interesting because the actors say, it sort of sounds like how we speak, which is true, but it's also this super stylized way that nobody speaks. Nobody speaks, 3 words of a sentence, even if they are just, having a casual conversation. So it's at the same time super stylized and quick and fast, but also lives in this sort of like natural text place all at once. Mm-hmm. And so once the game of the sentence fragments was in my mind, then writing the play was very
So
quick.
that container, the fragmented dialogue, is part of the theme of the play.
Yes, yeah. And I want the audience to feel what the characters are feeling through the container of the play. So this father and this daughter are getting frustrated; they can't quite connect, and so I'm hoping that the audience is also feeling that frustration in a good way of I just can't quite grasp the full phrase because it's being withheld from them.
I was impressed at the degree to which it was possible to finish their sentences for them. They do a lot of that themselves. They try to finish each other's sentences and sometimes fail quite dramatically. But the degree to which you could see where those lines wanted to go made you take some personal investment in those characters. It made you want them to be able to finish that thought, to communicate that thought to the other person. Why is it important to you, Chelsea? Why is a father and a daughter trying to communicate important to you?
I think that it's no mistake that the majority of this play was written in the middle of a global pandemic. And the early drafts began before, so it's not entirely from the pandemic, but I think that a big part of the heart of this play, of just trying to reach through that invisible barrier that's keeping you from people who you want to love and you want in your life, was written when we were all stuck in our attic offices. And that yearning and that longing, I think, is in the play from that experience.
It feels like that. It felt very much like that. Last question or line of questioning, if I may. What do you want to do? So you've got this extraordinary achievement, which is the National Theater School as one of 2 playwrights selected during the year that you began there. You've had a chance to work with some extraordinarily talented people at some of the best. The Tarragon is arguably in the top tier of theaters in North America. I would think that it's hard to think of a lot of American theaters that I would put on that level in terms of developing new work. I mean, the Public Theater comes to mind. There are a few others, but not many. Maybe Steppenwolf at one point. What's next? What do you want to do next, and why?
I love writing plays with a large amount of people in them, which I don't know if it's the same here, but it's challenging to convince a theater company to do a 10-person play these days.
We love epics here at Burning Cold. Okay. The first show we did in this building had 24 actors in it.
I love that. And so I have a play that I've been working on. It seems like forever, that has a cast of 7, and the reason it's been forever is because it's a cast of 7, and it's hard for companies to find the way to do that. And 7's not even that huge. No. But I've loved working on that play. I did another play with 6. So I would love the opportunity to work with no parameters on how many actors I can do. I have this idea of adapting some Mozart operas into theater, but of course those have casts of 50 people. So. So I think big casts, big epic, grand stories.
Do you gather people? Do you gather actors in your mind that you then write for as your?
You know what? I don't, and I feel like I might be the only playwright who doesn't. But for me, I don't see anything when I'm writing. Oh. I write musically, and I remember the actor for this play, Paint Me This House of Love, from the original Toronto production. One day in rehearsal, she stopped everything and was like, "Oh my goodness, it's a musical score. It's a piece of music, the way that it's phrased, and that feels more accurate with my muttering. It's so that I can hear the phrasing and hear the melody of the lines together, more than seeing actors. Which gets me in trouble when a theater company is generous and says, "Hey, we'll do a workshop of your play. Who do you want to cast?" And I'm like, I don't know.
Have at it. Well, that's fantastic. Yeah, epic is sort of our unwritten middle name here at Burning Cold. We like to do plays about big ideas, and sometimes that's a one-person show or a 3-character play or something, but oftentimes it does take scope and critical mass. It's hard to do those great Shakespeare history plays with 3 people on stage swinging swords at each other, and stuff. It's hard to believe the import of what's going on if you do that. So, Well, Chelsea, we are looking forward very much. We've just begun rehearsals for your show. I believe you were there last night for
Yes.
one, and will be with us a few more times this week before you head back north. We will keep you apprised of it, and we wish you the best, and or break a leg, as we say in the theater, and we look forward to perhaps reading some of your future mutterings.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here.
Thanks for coming.